Good evening and welcome to our City Council meeting of April 13th, 2020. I'm David Avila, your City Mayor, and we'll go ahead and convene the City Council. We'll ask Captain Williams, please, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Honorable Mayor, members of the Council, if everyone will join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Captain. All right, Tammy, if you don't mind, call roll.
Councilmember Bogue,
Here.
Councilmember Duncan, Councilmember Riddell,
Here via telecommunications.
Mayor Pro Tem Allen,
Here.
Mayor Avila.
Here. All right, moving on. Mr. Casey, are there any changes to the agenda?
I have no changes this evening, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, very good. Public comment.
I'm sorry, just for the record, there are several minor revisions in agenda items that were passed out this evening.
Okay, thank you.
Living in an RV in our driveway the past 2 weeks. We have received notification from our HOA that we have 10 days to remove the RV or we will be fined for the violation of our HOA code, that no RV shall remain on the premises for more than 72 hours. As I am sure the city has been dealing with many issues with the pandemic, this too is important as it not only affects my family, but other medical professionals, first responders, and essential employees who are trying to keep their families and others safe from their high-risk jobs and the potential for infection. I'm asking our City Council to look into this issue and try to put forth a temporary order allowing for the use of recreational vehicles to be allowed on residential property for the temporary purpose of housing individuals who seek to self-distance themselves from the other residents at the address. Chapman Heights Community HOA has made it clear in writing to me that they will not deviate from the current practices until instructed to do so from the city. We live in dire times with this pandemic, and we need our city government officials to help raise up our frontline medical providers and other individuals seeking to self-quarantine while staying at home.
Thank you. Would you like to comment on that? I think we have.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The city has adopted an emergency executive order, if you will. That item is also on your agenda this evening to be ratified, which basically waives that requirement during this emergency time. We have shared that with the Chapman Heights HOA. We are told that they're going to have a board meeting tomorrow to discuss this issue based on that executive order that the city has adopted.
Very good. We have another comment.
I do, thank you. This is from Lorena Rodriguez. Working graveyard shift at a 24-hour fast food here in our city, we get young adults. They are either drinking alcohol in their vehicles or drunk and most smell like marijuana, not one person, but 2 to 4 in a car. Why can't there be a curfew for fast food? If the pharmacy now closes at 9, why are we open 24 hours?
Okay, and I'm sure you've passed that on to Captain Williams, and he can address that issue.
We will certainly do that. Obviously, the city doesn't establish the curfew for the pharmacies either. That's a choice that the pharmacies are making. The next public comment is from Marion Lovelace. I would like to thank council and staff for doing everything possible to keep our community safe. Thank you to the first responders to work, and we can support these businesses. I think we can all deal with wearing masks for a while and social distancing. The tricky one will be the restaurants. That will take a lot of creativity, but I am sure you've already been evaluating that. Once again, thank you. Marianne Lovelace, Acacia Avenue.
Thank you. I think we have one more.
This is from Ryan Danzy. COVID-19 has impacted everyone. This is a matter of fact. People have been encouraged to exercise. Trails to hike on are a good idea. Make it simple. People want to get out who would normally park in the area of the trailhead and placed it in front of our homes. I'm requesting that the City Council open that parking area back up and allow the traffic that already will happen to, again, park in that location instead of on the street. Blocking the street parking area off, did nothing. As soon as the sun is out of the area of Shadow Hills Drive and Sherwood will be lined with.
Thank you. Do you wish to comment on that?
Yeah, if I may, sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, that particular parking lot is owned by the county, not by the city. We have partnered with the county, are planning to partner with the county with some improvements there, but the ownership is with the county. However, I will say that that is part of the order that the public health officer, county public health officer has given to the county is the closure of parking lots for parks and trails. I do believe there's some discussion going on relative to clarifying some of the order that was distributed here a few days ago. There's already been some clarifications made in some of the elements, and we anticipate having an opportunity to have input into an updated order that may include some of those issues relative to parking lots being closed for parks and trails. And so we will certainly discuss the issues with the county representatives in the next few days.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Ray, are there any city parks or city trailheads that we could open on our own without the permission of the county?
Potentially. We have closed the parking lots in our parks. We have endeavored to follow the public health officer's orders to date. There are some areas that are serving as trailheads that may not completely fit that category, and we could reconsider opening some of at least one or two of those parking areas. One of them is a more formal parking lot. Others are kind of informal parking lots. So we can certainly consider that.
Okay.
All right, thank you, very good. Okay, moving on to consent agenda. Is there anything any council member would like to pull off the consent agenda for discussion? Seeing none, hearing none. Before we go for a vote, I'd just like to say that I've had several comments and concerns regarding the item number 6, the poultry ranch inspection MOU extension. And I just want to state for the record, and so the public knows, that this extension is nothing more than just that. There are no changes, significant or insignificant, to this MOU as it was up to this time for the extension. Nothing has changed. It's just allowing us to extend it a little bit longer than originally planned. So, do I hear a motion for consent?
I'll move consent.
Second.
We have a first and a second. Tammy, will you do a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Riddell,
We'll be able to do that, or the one after.
Those were actually my two concerns. They've already been addressed. One was, if we have to sit here with this mask on, I'm not sure why we're doing it here. We should do it from home. And the second one was to make sure that all the trailheads are open for the public to get out and use them. And I mean, we as Yucaipians, we are proud to have that open space and the trails so that people can get out and be alone and get out and walk around. And then, when issues like this arise, we close them. It doesn't seem to make too much sense.
Understood. We have had a little bit of complaints from neighbors relative to what they characterized as gathering in some of the trailhead parking areas, but I think that can be mitigated with other measures. So understand.
Okay.
All right, moving forward. Let's see. Mayor and council member business, I already asked that? Okay, possible actions on pending legislation. Anything to report over there?
I have nothing this evening, Mr. Mayor, other than to say in the recent Housing and Economic Development Committee meeting, there was a ton of state legislation that deals with affordable housing and deals with continued erosion of local control. And perhaps the best way to share that information is via email or memo to council, because there are a number of those pending legislative actions out there, so.
Okay, very good. Okay, we'll move on to department reports. Before we go on to our agenda items, I believe Supervisor Dawn Rao is on the phone, and she would like to make a presentation. Supervisor Rao, are you there?
I am, Mr. Mayor and Council. Thank you for having me this evening.
Well, you're welcome.
I had 4 things that I really wanted to update you all about with regard to COVID and the county's efforts. I'll try to be brief so that you can get on with the council meeting. But the first thing is that we did have the Crafton Hills College specimen collection event that we held on Saturday there in Yucaipa. We administered 92 tests. The results will be returned within 2 to 3 business days, and they will contact the patients first, and then those numbers will be reported in terms of positive or negative to the state, and then the county public health will get the numbers from the state. So it should be approximately, I'm going to guess since it went in on a Saturday, that within about 5 days from Saturday, we'll have those numbers updated on the dashboard. The testing event was our first to do with a public-private partnership with you all, and I really commend you. It went really well. Thank you for your partnership. I'd like to thank the private entity, I believe it was Dr. Barry is how he pronounces it, with the local urgent care, who helped us acquire the test, and Crafton Hills College, the city staff in Yucaipa that came out on a Saturday, the sheriff's department, and all the county workers for their efforts. So it was a great first public-private partnership that I hope that we can emulate in the future, and I appreciate all that you did to help make that possible. And then the second thing is, because of all of the nursing homes that we have, the skilled nursing facilities that are unfortunately all sort of centered in the 3rd supervisorial district and right in and near Yucaipa, the county has gone to a nursing facilities task force, and that formed with the outbreak starting at Cedar Mountain Post-Acute Rehab Center there in Yucaipa. The task force is comprised of the San Bernardino County Department of Public Health, the California Department of Public Health, the Center for Disease Control, and then the Inland Empire Health Plan. Those are the county agencies that are partnering together. This task force will proactively work with nursing facilities throughout the county to assess readiness and provide support for the COVID outbreaks when they happen. So that's a great joint partnership that we have. And I'm sorry that Yucaipa was at ground zero for that, but we've really been able to get a lot of our resources in from the federal and the state governments to help with that. The third thing is that out of all of that, the county public health issued an order related to nursing facilities because of the Cedar Mountain outbreak, and it is to really prevent the spread of the coronavirus to nursing facilities. And that order mandates temperature screening for anyone entering facilities that provides care to seniors, such as hospitals, skilled nursing, and long-term care facilities, as well as hospice care. It also mandates self-evaluation for symptoms of COVID-19 prior to entering a nursing facility. It prohibits the entry to anyone running a fever over 100 degrees or above. Staff must also wear surgical masks at all times. And if there is a confirmed case of COVID-19 present, then N95 masks are required. And facilities must avoid using staff who work at other nursing facilities, so it prevents that crossover between staff. And then lastly, the response to the outbreak at Cedar Mountain Post-Acute Rehab Center. Just to give you some kind of stats in the latest update, as of April 9th, we had 64 positive residents. Unfortunately, 10 of them have passed away. We also have 27 positive staff members, and that makes a total of 91 positive in just that one facility. I've been working with Congressman Cook and Aguilar to get the Center for Disease Control teams on site. So those two gentlemen were extremely helpful in getting the CDC out to help with that outbreak. And then they provided their expertise in mitigating the spread of it to other nursing home facilities. The county has requested and has received support from the California Emergency Medical Services Authority to augment the Cedar Mountain staff. And that augmentation consists of 5 paramedics, 5 emergency medical technicians, 3 support staff, and a box truck with additional supplies. So it was unfortunate the location was there in Yucaipa, but it has also positioned us to be able to serve your residents and other nursing facilities that are in proximity to that. So I thank you and your staff and everyone, and Ray's been great in communicating on an almost daily basis as we work through this to keep your residents safe. So that's all I had for you today, and I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Supervisor. Are there any questions of Supervisor Rao?
Don, did you say that there were 10 people who passed in the one facility, or is that 10 in the city of Yucaipa?
It said this is specific to Cedar Mountain Post-Acute Rehab Center, that there were 64 positive residents, of whom 10 had passed away.
Okay, thank you.
In addition to that, we have 27 positive staff, but no staff has passed. The total positive count just out of Cedar Mountain stands at 91 right now.
Okay, very good. Well, not good.
I do have a question. Do you know if there's been any contact tracing for those 27 positive staff members?
There was. The owner of that particular facility also owns several other, and they went to wherever there was crossover with staff. They have gone to the other facilities and done mass testing of the other facilities where we have not had any other positives.
I meant more out in the community.
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, thank you.
Ray, did you have something?
I just wanted to, if I may, Mr. Mayor, share our appreciation from staff for Third District Supervisor Rao and her staff's support. As she mentioned, we've been communicating literally on a daily basis just about, and you know, the pop-up testing that we did at Crafton College, certainly the staff at Crafton was very supportive, but Supervisor Rao and her staff was also very supportive, and this was a great model as a public-private partnership. And I also wanted to take this opportunity to thank Congressman Cook and his office for their help along the way. As Supervisor Rao mentioned, they've been very supportive as well in trying to get us additional resources, federal resources. So thanks to everybody for those efforts, including thank you all at the council for giving us the ability to do what we can to try to mitigate the coronavirus spread here in Yucaipa. Without that leadership, we couldn't have done any of the testing that we did this weekend, or some of the other mitigation measures that we're implementing as well. So thank you.
And Ray, just to echo what you say constantly, it's all a team effort, and it's a collaboration with city council, city staff, in this case, the County Board of Supervisors and County Health. That without all of us working together, we could not achieve what we've done. Supervisor Rao, thank you very much. Unless you have anything, thank you for speaking, and you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I know you all know this, but I just can't tell you enough how what an honor it is to work with Ray and your team there at the city. They are fantastic. So thank you for the opportunity, and you all have a nice night.
Good night. All right, let's move on to, I believe it's item number 5. Biennial.
The rest of, if I may, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, I'm
the
But we're
rest
on
of the-
item 8, Dave.
Oh, item 8.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and-
just
and
for
that was-
clarification.
Just for the record, her presentation was also part of item number 8, just
Okay.
for the record. So this item is the extension of the declaration of the local emergency due to COVID-19. I won't get into a lot of the detail about how we got here. I'm sure you all remember the series of events, the series of actions that you've taken, and I'll focus more on what we have done more recently. I will say one more thing about the testing we did last Saturday. I was very, very impressed with the health department staff and the professionalism and the way that they just performed their work. I was very impressed with them, and also Dr. Berry's staff that was out there taking the tests as well. Really beneficial to have local partners. We wouldn't have acquired the test kits from LabCorp if it wasn't for Dr. Berry's office and a lot of phone calls with LabCorp. So thank you to them as well. with the rest of the staff report, we'd like to extend the emergency declaration again from April 13th for 30 days, I believe. Normally, we have the ability to extend every 14 days. The state's extensions are 30 days at a time. We'd also like to request the waiver of our 14-day requirement for the rest of this emergency, just because of the timeframes that the state has extended their emergencies, and allow us to extend them basically 30 days at a time. In addition, we'd like to, and this is an item that, Mr. Mayor, you may have to recuse yourself from, the discussion relative to the ratification of the general fund contingency funds. If I may ask that you recuse yourself from that, we'll do that first, and then the rest of the staff report, if that's okay.
Okay, if you want to address that first, I'll go ahead and recuse myself and step out for a moment.
So just very quickly, council has previously approved the forwarding of the payment, accelerating the payment for next fiscal year for the chamber as a result of the impacts to them of the coronavirus and not being able to do some of the events that are their primary fundraisers at a previous meeting. And this item is to simply ratify use of contingency funds to pay for that request.
So we're going to vote on item number 2 separate from the rest
Correct.
of item number 8. And so are there any questions of staff? Councilman Riddell, do you have any questions on this item?
I have no questions.
Okay, hearing no request to ask any questions on this, I'll ask for a motion.
So moved.
Do we have a second? I'll go ahead and second it. All those in favor? No, we're going to do a roll call vote. Go ahead.
Councilmember Riddell,
Aye.
Councilmember Bogue,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Allen.
Aye. Passes 3, 1, and 2 are absent from voting. 3, zip, zip.
3011.
Yeah. So we'll go ahead and invite the mayor back in to continue with this item.
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. So the rest of the item includes the extension of the emergency declaration period and the ratification of the City of Yucaipa Executive Order 20-01 regarding the emergency recreational vehicle parking regulations approved and issued by the Director of Disaster Services on April 10th, 2020. And that's the waiver of the parking requirements for RVs, trailers in the front yard, citywide. And as we talked about earlier, we believe the HOA, Chapman Heights HOA, will follow suit now that the city has approved that. And we're asking council to ratify that this evening. With that, I would like to talk about one other issue. You probably have seen that local agencies, Calamasa recently, I think Highland will be doing it as well here shortly, are, just to make it very, very clear, they are approving the public health officer from the county as the public health officer acting for the city as well in such issues as this pandemic that we are faced with right now. It's a little bit unclear whether that's an absolute requirement to update our ordinances to reflect that, but we can certainly come back at our next meeting and do that if council so chooses. And Dave can, our city attorney can add to that to the extent that you need additional information.
Mr. Snow?
I don't have a whole lot to add to that. Again, under the Health and Safety Code, there is actually a requirement that the city adopt or appoint a health officer, and that's something that we should look into doing at some point in the future. But other than that, I don't have anything else to add at this point.
Any comments from anybody? Okay, yeah, we can do that then. And I just assumed that it was just part of the gig as soon as we, they're the ad hoc public health officer because we don't have one, so you just think that'd be automatic, but if we have to put an ordinance, then we should look into it. Okay,
So if I may, just two other things. Number one, we talked briefly about the county order as it relates to parking in parking lots at parks or trailheads, and we'll follow up on that. In addition, the recent order, as you know, requires the wearing masks for residents anytime outside their home, including essential workers. And as you have noticed, we are all wearing masks here at City Hall as well. And then finally, let's see, make sure I've got that. Okay, finally, we have at a staff level and supported of the elected officials in the county that we know are going to be focused on the recovery, economic recovery from this as the health recovery turns the corner. And so we have worked on created a subcommittee of the SBCTA City Managers Technical Advisory Committee and the county's CEO's office to start talking about those technical aspects of what it takes to help get the economy moving again in this county. And our first meeting is later this week. And so to the extent that anybody has any suggestions along those lines, I'm happy to prepare and present those to the subcommittee of city managers and the CEO's office as we start down that path in support of what we know will be elected officials' focus in the weeks to come, again, after we've turned the corner with the health issues that we are confronted with. And so I'm happy to take any of that input this evening, or if you have any input along the way in the form of emails or text messages, however you want to give that to us, we'll present that to the group. And that's all I have.
all right, do we have any questions?
I don't have a question, but I have a couple of comments on the efforts moving forward. And first of all, I think that it might be good to look into acquiring masks. I know that I've had conversations with people, the gal that's working with Smiles for Seniors, I've brought this up before, and if we're going to start getting people back out in public, it might be wise as a first step to make sure that everybody, at least in the interim, is wearing masks, and sometimes those might not be easy to acquire for some people, maybe some people that are on fixed incomes. Maybe we can look into what it would cost to get those. Also, I think that they're going to be important as we expand our essential services list and try to figure out ways to get businesses back online. Our restaurants, certainly, there's probably ways that they can be brought online with some distancing guidelines initially, but the profit margin for restaurants, I know, is very thin, and it would be great if we could focus on at least that one segment of the market in terms of trying to assist. Also, perhaps, and I don't know how well it's going, but initially I have heard that it's been a struggle for businesses to get these small business loan applications completed. And perhaps we could hire a part-time person in the interim to assist businesses to get those things completed, submitted, so that they can get those loans that hopefully will turn into grants for them as they try to stay without having to go under completely. We want to try to keep them viable while they are working through this very difficult time. So, if there's something we can do to assist with that, that would be great.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, we on the last item, we have a committee committee is not the right word, we have a team is the right word, of staff members that are available for that. We continue to put that out on social media. We put that out and included that information in the mayor's letters. And I know Caroline is here this evening. Caroline Velarde is heading up that team. She also listened to a webcast today that had some really good information. I was on the line for part of that, but had some really good information about how to access some of those SBA loans that turn into grants, as you said. And so she's available, and her number is posted on our website, Facebook page, and her team includes Heather Barger, that's been working on our incubator center as well. If there's anything that we can do to help folks down that path, we're happy to do that.
I don't know if perhaps it might help, I don't know how connected everybody is to social and web-based, information, but maybe just a one-page flyer that we could distribute to businesses as well, because, I mean, not everybody is living in the technological world that we're all, some of us are used to accessing information through, but we want to really make sure that our small businesses know how important they are to us in this community. So perhaps even a flyer we could just put on their door or mail them off or whatever.
We'll do that for the sticks and bricks businesses as well.
Greg, do you have anything? I have a question regarding, now, you get your loans through the banks, and have the banks done anything to help the small businesses? Do they have programs and doing things as we are trying to do, providing assistance and specialized service?
So the part of the webcast that I listened to today included some advice for small businesses and how to interact with their banks relative to their mortgages, or how to interact with their landlords relative to their rents. And so there was some advice given in terms of communicating with both, and oftentimes seeking some extension of times for their payments, recognizing that the small business loan availability will turn to grants if they follow certain guidelines, and they'll be able to cover their costs. So some of that was kind of anecdotal in terms of providing business advice from one business owner to others. Beyond that, I think the Small Business Association loans and grants are the best route, and they're happening fairly quickly, and they actually go right through to the banks from the Small Business Association. So Caroline could perhaps add some more detail to that, but the information is out there, the resources are out there, and they're happening fairly quickly for a federal program like this. And Caroline and Heather Barger are both available to provide more technical assistance.
It's just that I've been following stories locally of people who are being told by lending institutions that they've met their maximums, and then they don't know where to go next. So really having that support, having the person they can just tap and can redirect them would be very, very helpful for some of these business owners. So sometimes it's just hard to navigate that whole environment.
Absolutely. We have enough trouble as well.
Yes.
Very good. Dick, do you have anything to add?
No.
Okay, any further discussion on this?
I'll make a motion to extend the declaration, and that would be item number 1, because we've already approved item number 2.
Very good, we have a motion to accept.
Was the parking lot requirement
Is that included?
included?
The parking lot, the RV parking? Ray, or do we need to have a separate motion for that?
What I would suggest is provide direction on that. Excuse me, I lost my screen here.
Well, we need to make that happen now.
Yes.
So is
Make
that
it
included in
so.
your motion then?
Do we need a separate motion for that?
You could give us a separate motion that includes direction. I'd be a little cautious to go directly against the order. We will get, I think, an updated order in the next day or two, if
No,
it's
no, I
okay.
mean for the RV parking. I think that's,
Oh.
is that what you're
yes,
asking?
Yes, I'm sorry.
That's what I'm
I thought you were
asking.
talking
Yeah,
about
you
the
lost me.
trailhead parking.
Yeah, no, not the parking, not the trailhead parking, the
Okay,
the RV parking. So that's included with this? Or
Yeah,
do
that
you-
one's pretty clear. That's a ratification of Order 20-01. We would like your approval for that.
A
yeah.
ratification, sure.
It's recommendation
motion?
3 in the
Yep.
revised staff
And
report.
Then I'll
I would
second,
include that.
I'll second that motion then.
Okay, we have a first and a second. Any further discussion or confusion? All right, Tammy, if you mind, take a vote.
Councilmember Riddell,
Aye.
Councilmember Bogue,
Aye.
Councilmember Duncan, Mayor Pro Tem Allen,
Aye.
and Mayor Avila.
Yes. Okay, it passes 4-0, one absent. We're on number 9 now. Is that correct?
Yes.
Biennial review of the mobile home rent stabilization ordinance and resolution, rent adjustment upon vacancy.
And I will take that one, Mr. Mayor, if that's okay, thank you. So this item is an item that was previously heard, resulted in a tie vote. The council, the recent meeting, elected to separate this issue from the rest of the ordinance, and you adopted by second reading the rest of the ordinance earlier this evening. This is your first reading for this element of the biannual review, which is a vacancy control. And I guess I want to say for the record, I think Amy's on the line, Amy Grayson?
Yes, I am.
So Amy's obviously an expert in this area. And so this item is allowing for a vacancy control under certain circumstances that would establish first an increase under certain circumstances, which would be calculated based on 10% increase plus the average of all the rent-controlled spaces in the park, or $35, whichever is less. So that would be the vacancy control increase allowed under certain circumstances. The circumstances would include, exclude, I guess, and maybe Amy, I'll let you talk about the circumstances that would allow for a vacancy control increase versus those that don't, if that's okay?
Yep. Do you want me to go now?
Yeah, if you would, please.
Okay. So we've defined, the ordinance currently has a definition of vacancy. There's 3 ways it's defined, and it was done that way to make clear that any kind of change of occupancy, whether it was bringing on a new home or changing occupants within an existing home, there would not be any rent adjustment. Now, because the proposal is to allow a very limited category of vacancy adjustments, we had to define vacancy to cover all possible parameters of that, which is why if you look at the definition of vacancy in the ordinance, it actually, instead of having 3 categories, which is what's in the existing ordinance, there are now 7. And so what we have said is if the vacancy falls within categories 4, 5, 6, or 7, which are defined, and I'll talk about those, there is no vacancy adjustment. It's the same as it is currently. The park owner will be prohibited from raising the rents that are in effect immediately preceding that vacancy. On the other hand, if the vacancy is a type that falls within the definition of categories 1, 2, or 3, then this limited increase would be allowed, subject to submitting an application to the rent administrator and obtaining approval. And as the city manager said, it would be the lesser of either the combined average
of rent-controlled spaces in the park plus 10%, or $35 added to the most recent rent that was charged prior to the vacancy. And so what, in terms of defining when a vacancy is not allowed, any in-place transfer, which has been traditionally what has been of most concern to the park residents, which essentially means a transfer of ownership from an existing resident to a new resident where the mobile home remains in the park. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, just checking. That situation as it exists now, we would not allow a rent adjustment. In addition, if there is a change in occupancy of that mobile home, then there would not be an adjustment or increase allowed unless it was in a very limited category of abandoned mobile homes, which are defined in the proposed ordinance. The third category would be the abandoned mobile home in which the park owner gains title and then sells that home to a new resident. And in that situation, there would be this limited adjustment allowed. All of the other types of situations, the in-place transfer, the change in occupancy, replacing, if a mobile home owner decides to get rid of their very old mobile home and bring in a new one, there would not be an adjustment allowed. And any other change in occupancy through an eviction or other involuntary termination of tenancy, there would also not be an adjustment allowed. And that was designed to address the concerns that had been raised by YMRA that this protect residents from being pressured in such a way that they would involuntarily leave the park, and then the new resident would be subjected to a rent increase. So that vacancy is defined in on page 2 of the clean version of the ordinance that's in front of you. In-place transfer is also defined on that page, and abandoned in place is defined on page 2 if you want to take a look at those. And then we also created modifications to section 15.20.050 to set out the process of the general process of how the adjustments would be applied for and processed, and then making clear that the specific procedures will be set out in the administrative rules. And so accompanying the ordinance is a new set of provisions to substitute for some of the existing rules to basically put in more detail how these limited types of adjustment on space vacancy would be processed. In other words, the park owner would have to apply, the city would develop an application form, and the rent administrator would confirm what is the average of the rent-controlled spaces plus 10%, what are the rents that are shown in the city's records of the, based on when the space was most recently occupied. And it would be the rent administrator who would determine what is the current allowable increase based on that information that's on file. And I can answer any questions you have on these, either as to the ordinance or as to the rules.
Thank you very much. Ray, do you have more to comment on, or?
She went ahead and covered everything pretty well, I think.
Okay. Questions or comments of staff? I just have one, and it's a maybe a little ticky-tack detail, but on Section 8, Item 2, any mobile home space which is empty because the mobile home was destroyed, and the mobile home owner will no longer be a resident of the park. Would it be better to say the mobile home owner will no longer be a resident of that space? that's been vacated rather than the park, so it's a little more specific.
That's true.
And it actually identifies the resident to be vacant from the space.
That would be up to you. Yeah, it would be a narrower definition, because a mobile home owner whose coach burns up, they might be able to get another home in the park. And if we use the language you're suggesting, that would be considered a vacancy to which an increase would be applied. So I guess the question would be, it's a policy question. Do you feel that a resident in that category should have the protection of vacancy control, or in that category, should they be subjected to this limited type of increase?
Wouldn't they be subject to vacancy control anyway? If it was...
No, because if they bought a new home, a new coach to replace the one that was destroyed, that would fall under category 6, which is below the one you're talking about is number 2. If you look down at category 6, otherwise they arguably would fall within that and they would be protected. The idea was that if somebody, for whatever reason, and this is what staff's understanding was, I'm speaking for Jennifer, when we worked on this, but staff's understanding was that the idea was if somebody takes their home and moves away from the park, there's no longer any reason to protect that person, obviously, because they're no longer there, and a new person coming in is brand new. So a person whose home is destroyed by fire and they have an intent and, in fact, move out, do not try and put a new home on the space, the same theory would be they're leaving the park. There's no reason to protect the resident, the new resident coming in, because it's the new resident, in theory, who would be subjected to the rent increase. Under the alternative language, it would be an existing resident who is moving into a different space in the park, and the policy question is, do you want to subject that resident who continues to reside in the park but changes the space occupancy, do you want to subject them to an increase?
And that goes back to my question again. If they're under rent control, would there be an increase?
Yes. If we revised it the way you are talking about it, strike that. If they move into an existing home, no. If they bring a new home in, yes, because the rent control conceptually applies to the space, not the resident. So it would depend on the circumstances of that person, whether they're bringing in another home onto another space in the park or whether they're moving into someone else's home that they're buying.
Greg, please.
I think the idea of this is to protect those who actually live in the city of Yucaipa, and I think if we were to change it specifically to that space, you're now taking away those protections from the person that lives in Yucaipa specifically.
Makes sense.
So I think we probably should just leave it with the park.
Okay.
Is that?
I
I mean, I'm not even
I see something a little
100%
bit
clear
different,
about.
but, yeah, I'll go. I'll go with it. Not worth arguing.
I get what she's saying.
Okay, any other questions? Dick, do you have any questions or comments?
No,
I'm going to, I agree with what was just said, that if they stay within the park, then they shouldn't be subject to an increase. But I'm going to vote to retain complete vacancy control anyway, so I guess my comment is superfluous.
Okay.
So I'll make a motion to.
So if I may, I
I-
would like to read the recommendations, including the title, if that's
Okay, go ahead.
That City Council approve first reading by title only as read by staff of ordinance number 391. And ordinance number 391 reads, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Yucaipa, California, amending sections 15.20.020 and 15.20.050 of Chapter 15.20 of Title 15 of the Yucaipa Municipal Code regarding the mobile home rent stabilization program and rent adjustments upon vacancy, amending sections 15.20.020 and 15.20.050 of Chapter 15.2 of Title 15 of the Yucaipa Municipal Code regarding the mobile home rent stabilization program and rent adjustments upon vacancy, and to adopt resolution number 2020-17, amending resolution number 2011-52, section 3.0001 of the administrative rules of the implementation of the Yucaipa mobile home rent stabilization ordinance with respect to rent adjustments upon space vacancy. Thank you.
All right.
So I'll make a motion to approve the revisions as read.
Do you hear a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Tammy, will you call roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Burdell,
No, I'm in favor of retaining complete vacancy control, so my vote is no.
Councilmember Bogue,
Aye.
Councilmember Duncan, Mayor Pro Tem Allen,
Aye.
Mayor Avila.
Yes. All right, passes 3-1 with one absent. Thank you. We'll move on to item number 10, moratorium on residential and commercial tenant evictions. And that'll be presented by Mr. Casey again.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This item is essentially following the state recent orders relative to evictions. The City Council adopt by emergency ordinance, by title only as read by staff, an urgency ordinance of the City of Council of City of Yucaipa adopting emergency regulations related to residential and commercial tenant evictions and declaring urgency thereof. Essentially, the governor has established an order that creates guidelines for staying evictions and related actions relative to folks that are tenants in their homes, and so the staff's recommending that you follow the governor's order and establish those same criteria. Generally speaking, the period of time established in the governor's order recommendations this evening are through May 31st, with further delays, if you will, in terms of when payments are actually due after May 31st, if that is the end of the period, if they don't extend it further. And so there is some real flexibility in terms of tenants and paying for their rent, et cetera, including staying foreclosures or evictions or judicial foreclosures through May 31st. Be happy to answer any questions you may have about the item, but generally it's just following the state guidelines.
Thank you. Thank you, Ray. Any questions or comments of staff?
Ray, why would we need to adopt this if it's already a mandate by the state of California? Is this just so that we look like we're being compassionate, or is this just one of those?
I think it does.
It's already mandated by the state, so why is it even an item here? And then my second question is, what's the position of EVAR in regards to these mandates?
I'll defer to the first question. Generally speaking, it gives us more teeth, I guess, as a local agency to follow up and enforce as necessary, but I'll refer to the city attorney on that issue. The second issue, we have not heard from EVAR, at least I haven't heard from EVAR on the issue, so.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, with respect to the first question, the state, the first executive order from the governor authorized local agencies to adopt these types of ordinances and do their own types of protections for tenants. The second executive order was a little more strict on that. It did focus only on residential evictions. The urgency ordinance before you applies not only to residential but also to commercial rental agreements. There are also, the executive orders really were more procedural and kind of delayed the ability to start actions, and the ordinance before you provides a little more detail, and we think that would give the public, both landlords and tenants, some clear guidance on how to navigate this with respect to deadlines, noticing, and whatnot. So for those reasons, we think that this isn't just duplicative of what the governor has done, and that there's some value in making it more clear for the residents and business owners in Yucaipa.
And Eva, you think that maybe your wife would let you know how they felt? Isn't she on that board?
Yes, and they haven't made a determination at this point. So I prefer to find out from EVAR what their determination was first. I mean, you're talking, it may not sound like a big deal, but it really is. You're talking about someone's property rights and whether we're going to restrict their property right or not. What also gave me pause when I read this was recently paid my property tax. Property taxes are due every April, and April 10th and December 10th, and there was no reprieve at that point. So if a tenant has to pay his, or if a landlord has to pay his property tax, he's paying for it with rent. And now we're saying that, we're not enforcing the rent. And yet the government is not giving a reprieve on property tax. So I think we're creating a scenario, a situation that, although it may sound good, I think we're creating other problems by adopting this. I would just prefer that we consult with EVAR before we adopt this policy.
Dick, do you have any comments or questions?
I have a comment. I agree with the motion. I agree with the item as written, and so I'll go ahead and move it.
Denise, do you have any comments or questions?
No, the thing is, it seems to me like having these dates on here, it's just, I mean, some people might be going back to work sooner, and they might start having income. Some people might not be able to get back to work until later. Just depends. We don't know what the government's going to do yet in terms of getting this economy back up and running. So I guess because it says until the period of local emergency declared in response is concluded, or whichever is sooner. So May 31st, this could expire anyway. Or if the emergency is declared over in the middle of May, then it would expire as well. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
So that does give some flexibility, but also a sunset deadline. But I agree. Is there a reason why property taxes weren't addressed by the county?
Or by the state?
Or, yeah.
I know there was some discussion at the state level about deferring or delaying property taxes. I don't recall what the final decision was by the governor's office. I don't know, do you remember?
Well, it was, no, the decision was that you were required to pay by April 10th.
Okay,
They did not give a reprieve.
okay.
In fact, as of right now, if you don't pay, you're ensuing or incurring penalties. And that's why that in conjunction with this doesn't seem to coincide very well. I mean, if you're gonna take someone's ability to evict, to try to collect rent, and yet you're still obligated to pay your property tax, I think that's unfair. I'd like to get, I'm not a absolute real estate professional or expert, so I would like to defer to what EVAR has to say.
I think it's up to us to make that determination. We can get input from them, but they should not be the deciding factor or influencing factor that, to do what's right for the bulk of the people. I don't know how to fix that problem with the tenants, you know, and the people who are renting homes, and how you and I have to pay our property taxes at April 10th, and they do too. But maybe we can work with that Puzzle Palace there in Sacramento, and EVAR and other real estate offices can work with them too and try to get them to amend that, so there's a little relief on the people who rent the homes and spaces. Get some relief from them too, because they are just as much as, like you said, they're as accountable as you and I are to pay our taxes. So, but for this, I think we just need to do what I believe is to be the right thing, and try to take care of our citizens as best we can. Sometimes not everybody gets taken care of equally, but we have to try and take care of as many people as we can.
And this is a decree of the state of California anyway.
It is. It's following their lead, if you will, yes?
Well, according to the attorney, they gave us guidelines, and it's up to us as a locality to decide whether we approve or not, correct?
So again, there are some minimum protections that the state did enact. They relate to residential leases. They have to meet certain criteria, and then they get protections. They don't have the details that are included in the local ordinance that, again, I think would be helpful in addition to what the state has done on those. With respect to commercial, they're just under the state under the governor's actions, there's nothing with respect to commercial leases.
Okay. What do you guys want to do? Any
We have a
motions?
motion, I think, so I'll
Okay.
go ahead and second it.
Okay, we have a first and a second. Do we have any further discussion? Tammy, will you do a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Riddell,
Aye.
Councilmember Bogue,
No.
Councilmember Duncan, Mayor Pro Tem Allen,
Aye.
and Mayor Avila.
Yes. Okay, it passes 3-1 with one absent. Okay, moving on to number 11, is it? Hotel market study for the greater uptown. Mr. Casey, once again.
Actually, as an urgency ordinance, that would require 4/5 votes, so we only have 3 affirmative votes. So that actually doesn't pass at this point.
Oh, okay, I stand corrected, thank you.
Shall I go on to the next item?
And let's go to number 11.
Can we refer back to that? Is that something we could bring back? Because my position was that we needed to confer with EVAR.
Would that be an alternate motion?
Yeah, that would be acceptable to ask that it be brought back with additional information.
I would make a motion that we bring this item back after we hear the input from the East Valley Association of Realtors and their positioning.
I'll go ahead and second that motion.
Okay, we have a first and a second to bring this back after hearing EVAR's opinion and recommendations. We You have a first and a second. Any further discussion on that item? Tammy, will you take a roll call vote for that?
This
Councilmember
is Dick.
Verdell?
I have some questions.
Okay. Dick?
My questions are, and Vogue brought it up to begin with, we're subject to this anyway. Since it's a state order, we're subject to it anyway. So why confer with somebody and bring it back when we're subject to it anyway? By passing it, it just means we're agreeing with the state and putting a little more teeth in it. So I see no reason why we should. I'm in favor of passing it, but if it needs 4 votes to pass, and we don't have 4 votes, I guess I'll go along with it.
Okay.
Yes.
So that means we're taking that as a yes.
Well, I'd rather. I like it as written, but if we're going to delay it after talking to the real estate people, I don't see any point in it because it's going to pass anyway. But if that's what we're going to do, I'll vote yes.
Okay, Councilmember Bogue?
Yes.
Councilmember Duncan? Mayor Pro Tem Allen?
Aye.
Mayor Avila?
Yes. Okay, it passes 4-0 with 1 absent. Okay, we're good. That wasn't confusing either. All right, number 11, hotel market study for Greater Uptown. Mr. Casey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. This item is, as you mentioned, a market study, draft market study for your review and approval this evening. Back in November of 2019, council approved execution of professional services agreement with HDL to prepare the study. As you are aware, I'm sure, HDL has done our sales tax analyses and forecast for many years, and are now doing these kinds of economic development studies as well. In order to evaluate this potential for a proposed boutique hotel in the historic Uptown area. So we looked at, or they looked at 2 different sites, potential sites. One is the site next to the parking lot, next to the YPAC. And that site includes city-owned property and some additional property adjacent to it that is vacant or underutilized, or at least it was when they started the process. They also looked at a little bit larger site. That site that I just referenced is about 0.6 acres. They looked at a little bit larger site near the intersection of Yucaipa Boulevard and Bryant at the, I guess it would be the southwest corner. That property includes an existing office building of sorts, plus 2 existing homes on larger pieces of property altogether that totaled about 1 acre of property. That site, both sites, the consultant felt could be developed as potential hotel sites. The site next to the YPAC was considered to be kind of a micro hotel, potential micro hotel site. The other 1 acre site, a little bit larger, like a Comfort Suites or something of that nature. But the study indicated that there was a market for around 100 units in the Uptown area, even with the La Quinta Hotel going in near the freeway. A little different market, but for the boutique hotel versus the I-10 freeway corridor type hotel. And with the recreational opportunities with Oakland nearby and their number of visitors that they are experiencing annually now, even Forest Falls nearby, that there was enough of a market to support 100 units in a boutique-style hotel in the Uptown. They also talked about recreation in the community itself, and the household incomes are such that for the surrounding areas, and including Yucaipa, Oakland, West Riverside, or East Riverside, I'm sorry, East Redlands, the household incomes would support such a facility. With that, happy to answer any questions you might have this evening.
Thank you, Ray. Any questions or comments of staff?
Ken?
Dick, go ahead.
This is Dick. Actually, the one on Bryant, and that also includes that old church behind, deeper in the corner, doesn't it?
No, this would actually be on the corner where the window tinting business is located, and then the two residential homes next to it, that area.
Yeah, but there's a church further down Bryant Street. Isn't that included?
No, I'm sorry, that would not be included.
Oh, okay. And my other comments are, the way they described the hotel here, it sounded like a 4-star, maybe even a 5-star hotel. The other one sounded more like a 3-star hotel. I don't think we ought to limit it to one or the other. And also, I don't think we should limit it to those two uptown locations. If there's another uptown location that somebody wants to do, I think that this study should include those two. So those are my comments, we aren't limited to the type of hotel that goes in there. I really think that we would stand a better chance of getting a 3-star than we would a 4-star hotel. So I don't want to limit it to one or the other. And I also don't want to limit it to these two locations if somebody finds another location in the uptown that they think they can handle.
Go ahead, Ray.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of comments. Number one, we have had some conversations with potential hotel developers or builders about the uptown. Number one, they felt it was critical that we had such a market study approved, and we used that as information for their franchisees to review. And number two, they felt like the locations in the uptown were real critical. There may be another location that fits the category, but they were concerned about Yucaipa Boulevard access or visibility, if you will. They were concerned about proximity to the YPAC itself and other developments in the uptown. And so I would say, generally speaking, the location near Yucaipa Boulevard and Bryant, they probably would prefer because of the size and the Yucaipa Boulevard visibility. But the other site was almost as good, even though it didn't have Yucaipa Boulevard visibility as much. It's set back a little bit. You can certainly see the site from the side street, but not directly from Yucaipa Boulevard. So with those kind of constraints in mind, there aren't a whole lot of locations that fit that criteria, but there are some other locations with perhaps some demolition and reconstruction that might work. And so certainly the market itself, the market study itself would apply to those other locations as well. But perhaps the location itself may not be quite as good if we don't have the Yucaipa Boulevard visibility or the proximity to the YPAC.
Yeah, I can understand that these would be preferred locations.
I didn't understand what he said.
He said that those would be preferred locations.
Okay.
So good study. The recommendations on the final page, which in our agenda items 169, seem straightforward. I would agree. I think Area 2 is the right location. I'm not as motivated or compelled by Area 1. I think there's better uses for that particular piece of property that might be a better fit for our uptown, including access to businesses and the adjacency to the PAC. Additionally, it might be, and I agree, I think that other locations, it would depend on what the property owners want to do, and that the developer probably will drive what the decision is in terms of what type of hotel ultimately gets built. But perhaps the northwest corner, where the old gas station is, could be a possible alternative site as well. I think with what's going on with Singleton Road, and as more and more people become aware of that pathway to the mountain activities, that having it on Bryant Street makes a lot of sense to me. So just if you look at that northwest corner, it could use something new there. Anyway.
Yep, agreed.
Greg?
I just kind of see this study as just a tool that the city has to try to advocate for anything. I don't think we're really tied to any of these 100%. But I think we can use this at the ICSC conferences and so forth to try to advocate for something. So I don't think we're really tied down to any specifics with this study. Is that?
That is absolutely true, and
Okay.
you make a good point. The study can be used for other types of development as well. There's some information in there that all other types of users are always looking for at the ICSC conference and elsewhere. So good point. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I think this is a good springboard because it might inspire somebody to maybe want to move their property that's near these areas, or maybe not even in the areas, maybe closer to Bryant and Oak Glen Road. If not at that intersection, there's some opportunities there too, I'm sure. But I think overall, this is a good idea. And it's, if I understand it, it's mostly, one is an upper middle, which is akin to La Quinta Hotel and the Holiday Inn Express, and maybe something, Comfort Suites or something like that, I think is an example. And then I think that's appropriate for our demographics. I think we should pursue something like that as we're trying to continue with moving La Quinta forward.
And if I may, just for the record, the Uptown Association Board did review this study and approve it with the one recommendation that we make sure that we condition it for not for long-term stays.
Okay, very good. All right, do we have is this a receive and file or is this a recommendation?
It would be an approval this evening if you so choose, Mr. Mayor.
All right,
So move.
Second.
we have a first and a second. Any further discussion on this item? Hearing none. Tammy, will you take a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Riddell,
Aye.
Councilmember Bogue,
Aye.
Councilmember Duncan, Mayor Pro Tem Allen,
Aye.
and Mayor Avila.
Yes. Okay, it passes 4-0. Let's see, on to item number 12, disposition of city property, northwest corner of Yucaipa Boulevard and 13th. And I think that'll be Mr. Casey again. Oh, no.
Yeah, if I may,
Carolyn.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to introduce Caroline Velarde, our Housing and Economic Development Analyst. She'll be giving this report, and I'll follow at the end with some comments if council is okay with that.
Thank you. Hi, Caroline.
Hello. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. For your consideration this evening is the disposition of the city property located at the northwest corner of Yucaipa Boulevard and 13th Street. This parcel is approximately 8.87 acres in size and is surrounded by a mixture of uses, including commercial and institutional uses such as the city fire station and the high school baseball field. As you may recall, this property was part of a large land donation by the Finkelstein brothers. And like the other properties in the land donation, it was thought that this specific property was also subject to the deed restrictions that limited uses of the land for charitable, educational, and recreational purposes. However, through the title report preparation work for a previous sale with this property, current staff was recently made aware that the property is not subject to the deed restriction, allowing net proceeds of the sale, if approved, to be used for purposes in addition to recreational, institutional, and educational. The purchase and sale agreement before you this evening is with Coal Valley Partners. Coal Valley Partners is a Portland-based real estate development firm intent on building a Dutch Brothers coffee franchise on the property, complete with a drive-through component. Dutch Brothers is expanding their Southern California locations and have found Yucaipa and the subject property to be a preferred site. Key provisions of the PSA include a purchase price of $500,000 and a 150-day or approximately 5-month escrow period. The sale of the property is subject to a grant deed with use restrictions, which include prohibitions on the use of alcohol beverages and cannabis-related activities. In addition, because a portion of the property is located within the Alquias Priolo fault zone, the city and the buyer will share the cost of a geotechnical investigation to determine existence of any earthquake faults on the property, with the city's cost not to exceed $3,500. So this evening, staff is recommending that the City Council approve the recommendations listed in your staff report, including approving the sale of the city property located on the northwest corner of 13th Street and Yucaipa Boulevard, authorizing the city manager to execute a purchase and sale agreement to complete the property disposition process, and finally, providing further recommendations to staff regarding the allocations of the net proceeds from the sale. This concludes my report. I would be happy to answer any questions you may have at this time.
Thank you, Caroline. Any questions of staff? Denise? Dick, do you have any questions?
Well, I have some comments. I discussed this at length with Ray Casey, the city manager, and when this thing was first proposed, it was at that time it was believed to be part of the Finkelstein property, and that the proceeds should go for recreational or nonprofit organizations. And since that time, I guess it's found out that it isn't. And in discussing it with Ray, he understood that how we originally thought that this summer would go for recreational purposes. So what he came up with, and which and he was going to throw it out as an option, and which I strongly agree with, that we would put, say, $100,000 for YAPs and $100,000 for BMX. And the reason for the YAPs thing is that this is an essential thing for the city. They're in dire straits with the economic situation the way it is. That nobody's working, and everybody, or a large percentage of people like me, are confined to our houses. And this also that the financial crisis resulting from this pandemic has really put a burden on the principal donor to YAPs, and because of the market dropping 7,000 points, and the way it is that the principal donor to YAPs is unable to carry it this year like he has in past years, especially last year. So YAP still needs money to finish that quarantine facility that was being built for the dogs when they're first brought in. For 14 days they're quarantined. We did get a cover for it, but the thing has to be finished. But the bottom has to be leveled out and concrete poured, and also sides to this building have to be put on. Plus, their money income is just non-existent. So I'd like to go along with what Ray suggested or proposed as a proposal, that half of the money would go to BMX and YAPs, and the rest of it would go to interchange or whatever project that he suggested there. And the YAPs, I guarantee you could come up with a detailed explanation of how the money is being spent and all that. I'm unable to contact him at this time because of, like I say, I'm quarantined in my house. So I would like to make a condition of the sale that 100,000 goes to Yaps and 100,000 goes to BMX to pave their parking lot, and the remainder of it can go to other projects such as Ray suggested, the interchange, which is not one of my favorite projects, but is concession on my part. So I'd like to make that condition, and Ray could elaborate on it if he wants to, but I'd like to make that a condition of the sale.
Thank you, Dick. Denise, you have comments or questions?
Yeah, this is interesting new information, and I would, my position on this would be that we do not encumber for any designated purpose this money, that it just becomes part of the general fund, since this wasn't put on the deed or restricted for any particular use, which we now are aware of. Our prior discussion was based on the assumption that there was that condition by the family, but right now we have a lot of pressing needs in light especially of what's going on with businesses in the community and the reopening and everything else, and I just think that it would be unwise to take any money that we potentially may need and designate it for a particular purpose without having discussions about prioritization, goals, objectives, and that particular expenditure needs to come forward for discussion. We need to prioritize it, especially if our dollars are a little bit tight in the upcoming fiscal year. So I'm just for selling the property and taking the proceeds and putting it into the general fund.
So if I may, Mr. Mayor, that what was characterized by Councilmember Riddell was an example of how maybe somewhere around half of the proceeds could be spent on improvements in that 13th Street area, which we discussed, you all discussed, and with the understanding that we all had that this property was initially under that Finkelstein deed restriction, and an alternative to allocating all the funds to projects like the BMX project and the YAPS project and others could be to split the proceeds between projects in the 13th Street area, including improvements to YAPS and BMX, and to priority projects that may come from also from the goals and objectives process. So it was simply an example of how those funds could be distributed if council so chose.
Greg, do you have any comments, questions?
Well, I'm completely against conditioning any of this money. I think good politicians, I guess, spend the money before it even gets here, right? So how did the city acquire, if this was not part of the Finkelstein Trust?
It was part of the donated property, but both this property and the property on the other side of the fire station were excluded from that deed-restricted area that is attached in your staff report. Those two properties on either side of the fire station were not deed-restricted in that donation process.
But it was donated by the Finkelstein Trust.
Correct.
So wouldn't it be wise to still use the proceeds to put in back to whatever the Finkelsteins donated? Why would we take that money and use it elsewhere? It was a gift given to the city. I would assume that we would take the proceeds and put it back into the donation.
And that is clearly an option that the council has. Another option is to use half of it towards the donated properties. Another option is to, as Council Member or Mayor Pro Tem Allen mentioned, you have no obligation, legal obligation anyway, to do that. So you have a policy decision to make in terms of the net proceeds and how they are used.
Well, I don't want to condition the money for anything at this point, but I would highly advise that we use this money for that area, for anything that's in the Finkelstein original trust. I think that's only fair to the Finkelstein family. And to use it for anything else, I think would be just wrong.
I have a couple of questions. One is, do we know why these properties were excluded? We don't.
I have no, well, we have no information about why these properties were excluded. They are the properties along Yucaipa Boulevard. One could presume that, well, I'll leave it at that. They are the properties along Yucaipa Boulevard, but that's no information directly about that.
Okay, and the second question escaped me. I'll have to think about it first. Any more questions?
Well, I wouldn't be opposed to that, what Greg is recommending either. I just think at this point that it's unwise to say what we are going to use that money for. Ideally, that would be the right thing to do, but again, we just don't know right now what our tax revenue, other things are going to be coming at us. And I mean, it's uncertain times right now. So I guess we can take the money and put it in a fund and see where we land and as we move forward.
And as Councilmember Bogue mentioned, it'll be some time before we get the money, so that's
Right.
understood as well.
I know my question was there an expectation of these lands, if we were to sell it, to go back to the improvements that, as Councilmember Bogue articulated, goes back to the recreational and other amenities that Finkelstein's donated the land for?
Only to the extent that that's how we couched the question when we thought that this property was deed restricted. We asked the Finkelstein heirs whether they'd be okay with selling the property for commercial use and using the proceeds for recreational uses or institutional uses in the case of YAPS. And they approved that, they authorized that under that scenario.
And we didn't go back to
No.
to ask them for the...
Not at
well,
this time.
Okay, so maybe we should do that too. So what is their,
We can certainly
what
do
is their opinion? And what are their expectations of the sale of this, proceeds from the sale of this land?
That works.
And then the other part is, I kind of agree, you know, at first I thought, because the I-10 project is one of my big things, but listening to Councilmember Allen, sometimes it is better to have a plan, but maybe just sit on it for a little bit before, so we know what shakes out down the future.
I really appreciate both of those recommendations. It would be nice to hear from the family that gifted this to us and see if there's any clarity on why the properties adjacent to the boulevard were excluded from that condition. And because that'll help give us direction, and so that'll help with the clarification. And I think agreed that we shouldn't be designating it right now until we go through our planning, goals, objectives. And if we have recreational needs, which we always do, it would be appropriate to use those dollars for that purpose.
Could go along with Greg's suggestion that the money go for as we originally thought it would, and in respect for the Finkelstein donation to begin with, that the money be used for recreational and institutional purposes to be determined later. I could go along with that, and if that's a motion on Greg's part, I'll second it.
That will be my motion. That we do not allocate it to anything specific at this point, just as long as the money is, if that's okay, that it does go back into the properties of the Finkelstein Trust. And then
So it'll be used like when we originally thought it was Finkelstein property. It would be used for recreational and other institutional purposes to be determined later. Is that what your motion is?
I didn't
I
hear
think
that.
that's it, yeah.
Is that it? Okay.
For recreational
Okay.
purposes.
For anything
Okay.
within the designated, the original donation of the Finkelstein Trust, whatever that means.
Okay.
But
I'll second that.
I don't want to be specific about where it goes, and I don't want to spend it before the money is in hand at this point.
Okay. I'll second that.
And that goes along with items 1 through 6.
So those are fine the way they are. It's item 7 that you're giving us further direction on.
Correct.
Do we need to read the recommendations or just,
Just the last item, I think we're clear, but if you'd like us to reiterate what we heard, we can
Yeah,
certainly do that. Everything
if
else.
nothing else, just the last item again, because I got a little, I
Yeah, I
think there
think-
was two different conversations.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Councilmember Boak, but I think the motion is to approve items 1 through 6 as is, and approve item 7 in the form of providing direction such that the proceeds, the net proceeds of the sale would all go toward improvements to other donated property by the Finkelsteins, toward recreational or institutional improvements in those properties that were donated by the Finkelsteins, but that no decision would be made today in terms of exactly how those proceeds are spent.
That is correct.
Second too.
Okay, we have a first and a second on this. Any further discussion? Tammy, will we take a roll call vote?
Councilmember Riddell,
Aye.
Councilmember Bogue,
Aye.
Councilmember Duncan, Mayor Pro Tem Allen,
No.
Mayor Avila.
No.
That's a
I would
tie.
like to make a substitute motion that we accept items 1 through 6 as stated, and item number 7 to provide further direction of staff as deemed appropriate regarding the allocation of the next proceeds from the sale to be put into the general fund and to be decided later how to best use it, whether it goes back to the recreation or for some other purpose that takes a priority.
Would that motion also include reaching out to the Finkelstein heirs to get their input again?
You're absolutely right, to reach out to the Finkelstein heirs and find out what their expectation was regarding this sale of the property.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion on that item? Tammy, will you take the roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Riddell,
No.
Councilmember Bogue,
No.
Councilmember Duncan, Mayor Pro Tem Allen,
Aye.
Mayor Avila.
Yes. We seem to be at an impasse.
We could come back to you.
I was going to suggest I'd like to go ahead and continue this item.
That's just item number 7.
Item number 7
Approving all other, yeah.
for further discussion. And I don't think we need a vote on that, do we? It's just, since it's at an impasse, we can just move forward to
Do we,
continue.
You
do
would
we
need a
to
vote
move
on, yeah.
Do-
approving
items 1 through 6?
I'll move items 1 through 6.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a first and a second for items 1 through 6, excluding number 7. Tammy, will you take the roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Riddell,
No.
Councilmember Bogue,
Aye.
Councilmember Duncan, Mayor Pro Tem Allen,
Aye.
Mayor Avila.
Yes. So it's 3-1 with 1 absent. We will continue item number 7, but 1 through 6 passes. Thank you. Great discussion. All right. Moving on to public hearings. Item number 13, City of Yucaipa, case number 20-32/DCA, consideration of ordinance 389. Mr. Matlock,
Thank you, Honorable Mayor and City Council members.
I'll open up the public hearing.
Kind of a bit of background. Development Code Section 83.041120C 1A requires the undergrounding of utility poles within or directly serving each subdivision where there are 3 or more utility poles on the same street adjacent to the project property lines. And Development Code Section 88.0450 provides similar provisions for non-residential projects. The city had received a request to modify the utility underground requirements for infill projects where existing poles surround the surrounding site. Specifically, it was the developer for tentative tract map number 19901, case number 14138 along Douglas Street, So the subdivision is an infill within the interior block of Douglas Street. There is utility poles that run for miles on end across Douglas Street, and so under this subdivision, they'd be required to underground the 3 poles. However, as time has gone on since the development code was first crafted, the cost for doing the underground for utility poles have increased dramatically, and then the time review process through Southern California Edison has also increased commensurate with that, and so both the time delay for the permitting design as well as the actual construction costs makes that process prohibitive. And so the applicant requested that more pragmatic approach be considered that can kind of look at the existing conditions. A study session was conducted on January 13th, 2020 to discuss this request, and council had recommended that staff revise the underground utility ordinance for both residential and non-residential projects. Focus was to give better consideration for the existing conditions and poles for an infill project site. And then there's also a request to modify the pole undergrounding requirement from 3 poles to 4. And so the proposed ordinance does make these changes, and based on council's direction, does define an infill project as a site no more than 15 acres surrounded by existing development where the poles along the surrounding frontage have not been undergrounded. So this essentially puts in projects where it is an area where it's unlikely to see those utility poles underground at any sort of time without city participation, and so would then waive the requirement for that particular project as well. And then also, based on the council direction, modifies the pole requirement to 4. As a general note, this is a kind of another policy that the city would then help develop to support the delivery of housing during the housing crisis, and also gives a little bit more consideration for the existing built environment. The Plan Commission did review this ordinance at their March 18th meeting. The city did receive 1 public comment in favor of the ordinance, which reiterated the substantial cost and time delays with Edison to meet the current undergrounding utility requirements for smaller projects. And then the Chair Algauer with the Planning Commission did also note that the current undergrounding costs can be prohibitive for smaller projects, and so the Planning Commission did unanimously recommend approval of the ordinance for the project, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ben. Are there any questions or comments of staff? Denise?
Well, I just have one comment, and I guess it's just for clarification, but why is this the responsibility of any property owner anyway? Because it's the power company's property, and it seems to me like they should be the ones that are undergrounding the wires whenever anybody is changing the frontage of or doing a construction. Do we have any direction to make certain that SCE is given an opportunity to underground the wires when the roadway is being disturbed?
Under our current franchise agreement, that is not something that would be required of them, of Edison. We are reviewing the new guidelines for Rule 20, Rule 20A undergrounding that just came out from the PUC. Don't have any information on that yet. Our opportunity to comment on those guidelines goes through near the end of April, and we'll be providing comments relative to that. I'm not expecting that there will be an influx of funding from Edison relative to Rule 20 type undergrounding. It sure would be helpful. You would think with the safety issues that have risen in the last several years relative to wildfires, that they would be putting more funding into the Rule 20 program. We're hopeful, but not too optimistic. But as it stands today, those are the conditions. Hopefully these guidelines will lead to more funding from Edison and the other utility companies for undergrounding.
Well, I think whenever there's an opportunity for them to come and underground the wires, certainly there is a benefit to the entire community as more and more wires are put underground, but additionally the safety feature or the safety function of having those wires underground is really a big reason for them to do this, and the cost is just, when you look at the cost for undergrounding these power poles and the wires, it's really almost cost prohibitive for people that are wanting to develop.
It is, and that's one of the byproducts of this process, is that they have studied the Edison costs compared to PG&E and others, and Edison's costs are just astronomical, as you said, compared to the other utility companies across the state, so.
Thank you. Dick, do you have any comments or questions?
Yes, I do. If you're waiting, hoping that Edison's going to pay for undergrounding these facilities, you got a long wait coming, because the cost is just too prohibitive, and there's not a chance of a snowball in hell that they're going to pay for it. But I do think that our ordinance needs to be revised. If the proposed project is on an infill project, and if it's a residential project especially, I don't think we should require any undergrounding for 3 poles or more, because the cost is so expensive that it's just going to kill these projects. And if it's on a street like Douglas, I think is the example, where it's an infill project where this question arose, and there's no chance in the foreseeable future that any of the lines along that street are going to be underground, I don't think we should require it. I know in the past, and it's mentioned in the staff report, that I suggested that it go from 3 to 4 poles. I think judgment ought to go in. I think I trust for means of judgment implicitly, and if it looks like the electrical on that street is not going to be undergrounded, I'd say just go ahead and use judgment and bring it to the Planning Commission and the City Council to not make it a requirement that this be underground. I think any new projects that are commercial definitely should be underground. But if you underground some existing lines, it not only affects the poles there, it affects all the services on the opposite side of the street have to be undergrounded, and it really fouls up the street and everything else. So you have to end up repaving the street and everything. And for a proposed developer to have to pay for all this, it just kills the project. So I don't think we should require it on infill projects where it's obvious that the rest of it is not going to be undergrounded in the foreseeable future. And there's several examples of this around town, if you want to go take a look at them, where we did underground things, and the rest of it is just not going to be undergrounded. So I think we just shouldn't have this as a requirement, and just let Fermin make a judgment call and bring it before the Planning Commission, and of course it'd have to go to the council. But I don't think undergrounding should be required, especially on residential developments, on infill projects. So I'd like to make this, I'm in favor of what we're doing here, but I'd like to, instead of limiting it to 4 poles, I'd like to say leave that part out and just have it be the judgment part. That's my comment.
Thank you, sir. Greg, do you have any?
I just think it's a change that's needed. I've run across the situation personally in other cities, and I know it's devalued when you have purchase a piece of industrial property for $200,000, and yet you have $200,000 in undergrounding to do before you even break ground. Your property's value is 0 for the most part. So it just changes. I don't know about what Dick's proposing. I haven't really thought about it to that extent, but what's written here, I do support what we have written here. And then I am open to changes as needed. If something comes along and we need to make some changes and try to help some of these projects get built, I'm okay with that.
I think this is a good jump-off point. this proposed ordinance, we can always amend it due to facts and findings, as this situation is. And it gives Fermine or you or us something to work with. It's better to give in a little bit than having to deal with the stress of trying to figure out, well, this guy gets this and this guy doesn't get this, and how do you justify that? So again, this is a good jump-off point. I did receive 2 letters, one from a Julio Fernandez, who represents AT&T, who had a bunch of suggestions and revisions for us, including many things that we should be doing, but we're obviously not required. Yes.
I'm sorry, is that perhaps on the cell tower item?
You're absolutely right. I apologize. I got carried away. Here, I thought I was being important. Okay, so. No, it's my fault. Should be paying attention better. Anyway, any other questions or comments?
I'll move the item.
I'll second.
So we have a first and a second. Any further discussion? Tammy, we take a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Riddell,
Aye.
Councilmember Bogue,
Aye.
Councilmember Duncan, Mayor Pro Tem Allen,
Aye.
Mayor Avila.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, if we may just read the title real quick.
Oh, yes.
Okay, ordinance number 389, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Yucaipa, California, amending Development Code, Section 88.0405 of Chapter 4 of Division 8, and Section 83.041120, Subdivision Design and Improvement Standards of Chapter 4, Division of Land Procedures, Division 3 Procedures of the Yucaipa Development Code related to undergrounding utility requirements and adopting environmental findings in connection therewith.
Thank you. Do we need to take another vote or just accept this?
We should, I think we should do the roll call.
Okay. One more time, Tammy.
Councilmember Riddell,
Aye.
Councilmember Bogue,
Aye.
Councilmember Duncan, Mayor Pro Tem Allen,
Aye.
Mayor Avila.
Yes. Okay, formally approved. Okay, moving on to item number 14, City of Yucaipa, consideration of ordinance number regarding small wireless facilities and amending Yucaipa Development Code regulating the same. Ben.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor and City Council members. Kind of background, there's new technology for wireless telecommunications called small cell or small wireless facilities has emerged. This technology is really focused on supporting the deployment of the new 5G technology. Most cell phones in circulation right now are using the 4G, and so this is the next evolution of that technology. It's also to provide the backfill of high demand locations and provide additional bandwidth and capacity for those. It also helps serve as a bridge of the traditional macro sites. And then it's also really designed to support the continuously increasing demand for internet and data access. And so easy way to think of how this has evolved is how phone capability has expanded exponentially. Think of your iPhone or other mobile device and Siri and those capabilities are tied into the phone and how much power and computing technology is part of that. And so this really is helping to provide the support for those users as the cellular data has grown with these changes. Now, the facility itself is kind of different. Most cities are very familiar with kind of the macro sites, which are the taller towers with a number of antennas, so 12 different for individual carriers, supported equipment on a pole, plus a separate ground lease. Think of the monopine tree fate cell locations. That's kind of what the traditional macro site is, and there's other designs, but that's kind of what it is. This is a different type of animal. It's small cells, typically a single antenna, and then less equipment on a pole. And so it really does tie into the existing features of an area, the electric poles, light poles, street lights, and then some facilities may be either just modification of that existing pole requirement or replacing a pole with another one to support the antenna. And so on the PowerPoint slide is just kind of little examples, and then this is a street light that shows kind of what a small cell technology looks like. So modifying an existing feature that's pretty common in communities, but adding an antenna on top of it to support that equipment. Now, as the technology has developed, a variety of legislation was drafted aimed at really streamlining the process for this type of deployment. Ultimately, the FCC, or Federal Communications Commission, adopted a declaratory ruling and third report and order in 2018 that addresses the permitting process. As part of it, the ruling provides a very expeditious review process with very limited timeframes known as the shot clocks in the cell tower industry, and provides very limited local control on permitting of cell tower stretchers. The FCC ruling is currently subject to litigation. However, it is the rule of the land, and so based on both the draft legislation that was in process before the FCC ruling as well as the FCC ruling, the focus really is to have the deployment be as expeditious and efficient for the cell tower industry as possible, and so it's unlikely, even with the FCC ruling litigation, that it's going to substantially waiver in the future as well. Just as kind of background in the city has received 3 applications for small cell sites. As there's no current ordinance for these type of facilities, they automatically fall under our conditional use permit review process. However, the CEP process and the existing ordinance was not developed to address the small cell technology or the time requirements under the FCC ruling. The review process, the timeline, the application cost, and staff availability to process greater number of small cell sites that are replacing kind of the larger macro sites really limits the ability for the city to comply with federal law. And the small nature of these facilities also can result in batch applications. And so the city has developed ordinance number 388 to provide a more effective permitting process that's consistent with federal law. And it also includes reference to citywide policy regarding permitting requirements and development standards for small wireless facilities. So this is a resolution and a policy that's developed which allows a little bit more flexibility. So as there's changes to either federal law or other requirements that the city may want to add or kind of modify as applications receive, it's a lot easier to modify the policy at a resolution versus amending the ordinance every time. So that's why there's kind of 2 different components to this application, or to this ordinance for small cell permitting. Trying to go over some kind of 3 kind of highlights. The application, because of how limited the shot clock requirements are, does include a comprehensive list for what is considered a complete submittal applications to ensure that staff, the applicant, and any members of the public have enough information to know what is happening with the project. The city also does require pre-scheduled meetings to submit. Because of the shot clock and how aggressive the timelines are, the city or staff cannot afford the time associated and the risk of taking in an incomplete application. So it really makes sure that when a project is turned in, it's thorough, it's complete, it's adequate, and then it can go through the process as seamlessly as possible. And then the application form and fee resolution are to be developed. The council will ultimately approve the fee resolution for the application processing at a later time. Decision process, because of the timeline requirements as well as kind of the limited discretion that's available for these projects, would be approved at the staff level. And then there is a number of standards for the small cell site deployment to ensure that when applications are received, there's a hierarchy of sites that are proposed. And then there's also a prohibition of certain locations, including the decorative pools in the uptown, or pools that are scheduled to be removed or underground. So if there's, let's say, utility poles that we know are going to be underground, rather than having a carrier install poles or install equipment on that pole that's about to be removed, we would just pursue a different location or a different structure instead, rather than having this kind of interim condition that needs to be resolved and delays construction time and cost for that particular project. And then the Planning Commission did review this ordinance and policy at their March 18th meeting. They did recommend approval of the ordinance to City Council and did ask questions about the technology, questions about the proposed pole design, and then also confirmed that there was a criteria or hierarchy for the site design criteria. Kind of with any cellular type of equipment, there's always concerns about the RF frequency. Did want to reiterate Section 332C, or 7B4 of the Telecommunications Act of 1996 does really preempt the city from approving a project based on RF frequency. The cell sites are all subject to FCC requirements, and so it is the FCC that enforces those requirements, not the cities themselves. We are preempted from that requirement. As part of the project, we did receive 2 comment letters. One was a public comment received to the notice of public hearing that was included in the agenda packet from a citizen requesting that the city enact a moratorium on small cell sites during the COVID-19 declaration. The ordinance and the small cell sites that have been submitted in the city all occurred prior to the COVID-19. This ordinance really is to make sure that as applications come in, we have a process in place that is effective and can meet the timeline so that we don't inadvertently have a cell site that's approved pursuant to the federal law without having the ability to actually review and ensure that it is consistent with city policy. And then 1 comment letter was provided by AT&T with comments and some recommendations to the policy. Legal counsel has reviewed this comment letter and no comments warrant changes to the policy. The ordinance does provide a hierarchy of site locations to promote the orderly development and requests as part of the applications that are submitted, the information that's needed to substantiate or provide the substantial evidence to approve it as required by the FCC. The staff had also recommended the prohibition of cell sites on the city's decorative poles, since it would be unlikely at the time or right now that there's a comparable design in place that could replace the existing decorative pole in the uptown with a small cell site that would match. And rather than have a disparate design, we wanted to ensure that those features that the city had invested in as part of the improvements in the uptown are maintained. As a point of note, Corey Autry with the Wireless Policy Group representing AT&T had actually met with the city in September 26, 2018 to discuss the small cell sites, and we had also discussed and acknowledged that the decorative poles wouldn't be good for AT&T's use anyways. There's a number of other facilities in the uptown, including other wooden poles, buildings, and other structures that can provide sufficient site location requirements for small cell site deployment without necessarily needing to use the decorative poles that the city has installed. As a general note, as well as a policy and as a resolution, it can be amended in the future. So if there are new designs that are made available, we can certainly implement those designs as criteria if someone wants to redo the decorative pole. But since there isn't a design in place right now that the city is aware of, maintaining the prohibition to ensure the continuity of design is sufficient. And that concludes my presentation, and then I can read the ordinance title as well.
All right, thank you, Ben. Any comments or questions? Denise?
Well, I have quite a few questions actually on this one, but first of all, if they put a new one of these, they look to me like APs is what they look like, but if they put in one of these devices on the pole, how does it get its power?
It would connect to the existing power for the light fixture, so it would tie into that, and then sometimes they can add in electrical box either underground next to the pole and provide additional capacity for that, depending on the existing pole configuration.
So who's providing the power to these?
It'd be through Southern California Edison.
And they have an agreement with them to provide the power for these APs?
That is.
So how do they know how much they use? I mean, I guess that's a moot point, but they don't have to pay for the power they use to power these devices?
I guess, well, so they would tie into the SE equipment. However, the agreement is franchised with the cell tower industry, or the carrier with SCE would determine what those rates are. The city itself would not be involved with that.
So SCE could charge them for the power that they would require to use, and then they could use that money to underground our cables. Anyway, how far apart do these APs have to be spaced?
There isn't, or I was not able to find technical specifications. It kind of depends on what the site conditions are. The small cell covers both 4G antennas, and so kind of provide that backfill location, or the 5G. The 5G antenna frequencies provide a much shorter range, and so
Correct.
There were some articles that reference about 500 to 1,500 feet of distance, but there isn't, I couldn't find an actual technical specification that was cited in those articles, but it seemed like there was other factors. So if there's existing topography constraints, or maybe another carrier in the place that may modify their design, their RF frequency designers would provide more substantiation. So the propagation map that would be provided as part of the application submittal would give us a little bit more clarity on kind of what they're hoping to do, or at least give additional substantial evidence on their application.
So it's about 2 football field lengths, essentially, about the spacing. And then that belongs, for example, that would be an AP for AT&T. What if Verizon wanted to put one up? Would they have to then co-locate it on the pole as well? And are we going to then have these things stacked?
I have not seen many designs that do co-location on poles. My understanding of the technology as it stands now is that they would have separate pole locations. Certainly as comparable with the 4G technology, it may evolve, and so the form and compaction of those designs may improve over time, but it's my understanding that they would be on a separate pole to prevent
So a
interference.
separate provider would need a separate pole, and it's essentially first come, first serve then?
That'd be correct.
Is that how it works in the ordinance as written?
The ordinance just addresses when they submit for their particular pole location and then alternative sites that they assessed, providing information, but does not necessarily require co-location since that technology may not be feasible for that. But
And then, are they able to mount these on private, like commercial property?
that could be as well. The policy does address both the installation of small cell sites within the public right of way as well as those outside of it, and so it gives a little bit of flexibility on those or on other pieces of public infrastructure. Let's say like a reservoir tank for the water district could have a small cell site as well.
Do they have to then pay the property owners for that, for locating their AP on their building?
In the outside of the public right of way,
Yes.
I believe they do.
And is that delineated? I mean, I didn't see any mention of that in the letter we got, but, so, because I know there are cell towers now on private property, and they get paid for the location of that tower on their property.
I know for some, as part of the federal order, some of the fee limitations, it's definitely not as financially viable as, let's say, the macro site is, where it could command, a couple tens of $1,000s potentially in certain locations on a property. The small cell sites don't have that quite
So
that market share.
since these are obviously ugly, and APs are, by their nature, they have to have the ability to have the antennas in there and be able to broadcast from one antenna to the other to transmit the 5G signal. Do we have the ability, do they have different, I'm looking at pictures of them, it looks like they come in a lot of different form factors. Do we have that in our ordinance to make it compatible to, they have the right to put it on the pole, as I understand it. Do we have the right to delineate how it looks?
So as part of the policy in the resolution, it does identify for different types of structures, the minimum design requirements. So if, let's say, they are doing one on top of a SCE light pole, the cement pole, they would provide the radome for the antenna above it. They would ensure that the color matches the structure, and there's some additional requirements for the equipment, how that's mounted on site as well. So it does try to, recognizing it is it does stick out a little bit compared to the traditional light pole design. It does come across a little bit differently, but the ordinance has been written to help mitigate that potential design incompatibility as much as feasible and within the design limitations that we have.
Because I'm looking at some pictures here that I've found online, and some of these access points for this 5G are just hideous. And I think that it would degrade from the aesthetic value and some of the aesthetic things that we have been trying to do around the city. So I think it's imperative that we eliminate or minimize as much as possible the visual clutter.
Yeah, the ordinance or the policy does identify the design requirements, and then as part of the submittal, they would include both the architecture renderings of what the pole design would look like, as well as a photometric, so a kind of visual representation of, if you're driving by, here's what the structure looks like, so that we can best evaluate that they have tried to maintain the not to stick out like a sore thumb as much as they can.
Those are my comments.
Great, thank you. Dick, do you have anything?
Yeah, I do. I think there are areas in Yucaipa and the surrounding area where there are weak areas and dead areas for Verizon. I don't know what the problem is, but I think they could be corrected by these small poles rather than putting in those the large ones. And I don't know if AT and reading their deal, I don't know if they're objecting to it or not, but maybe it's a competitive issue or something. I don't know. But I think it's a good idea to put in these small facilities rather than those major big ones. And I think that'll correct a lot of the problems. It'll be more economical for them, and there'll be less sightly. And I think a few of these scattered around town would take care of the dead areas, especially that Verizon has. I don't know why. I'm on Verizon, and I work fine, but some of my neighbors on Verizon, it's a weak signal, and they have to travel a couple, 3-4 blocks away in order to make a telephone call. So I think a few of these small things scattered around town will take care of Verizon problems and maybe somebody else's problems too. And I don't understand why AT&T would object to it if they are objecting, unless it's a competitive issue. So I'm in favor of this item.
Just for clarification, if they are to implement 5G inside of the city of Yucaipa, how many APs would they need to deploy? I mean, it's just not a few scattered here and there. In order for the 5G to work, they have to be 2 football fields apart from each other. I mean, they're going to do it anyway, but that's a good question. How many of these APs are going to be required to bring 5G to the residents of this community?
The details of how many poles will be needed is not known. I imagine their deployment will probably roll out focusing on kind of higher density or where there's greater population that would benefit from those services, and then evolve to scatter out. The 5G technology may be used for a number of other purposes beyond just cell data, and so as that technology evolves may impact other decision-making stuff, but certainly some cities have, and part of why having a very streamlined process, city of Riverside, for example, where they're a much larger city, has been inundated with a number of applications. And so it isn't necessarily at every spot, but it may be over time a substantial amount of sites. And then hopefully the technology evolves to minimize the visual impact that's associated with that as well.
And they can add these to existing cell towers as well, because it's just a new radio.
It could be tied into existing structures, tied into buildings and other facilities as well.
Where we already have antennas for the whatever, the G, 4G, 3G, 2G, all the other Gs.
Greg?
Mine's a more simple question. I know we have multiple landscape lighting districts throughout the city. Will those people who are included into those landscape and lighting districts have to be notified of the incoming changes?
Is my understanding, no. The discussion was also brought up when I was speaking to council for like HOAs where they have some of the common area stuff, is that the pole itself is owned by people. So SCE, if they own the pole, they're the ones that are responsible for, the carrier is responsible for notifying SCE, not the HOA or LMD area.
I thought there were many areas where the city actually purchased the pole and the city owns the pole in the landscape lighting districts, and then the property owners pay the utility.
Yeah, actually, the city doesn't, I'm trying to remember if the city owns the pole. The city does, the LMD does pay for the electric for those poles. That is correct, but I don't think the city actually owns the pole. I think Edison owns the pole.
If I recall correctly, the city owns about 100 poles, and most of them are the decorative poles in the uptown for both the PBID 1 and PBID 2 area.
But like council member Allen said, or Mayor Pro Tem, Mayor Pro Tem. So the landscape lighting district will not be responsible for the electrical cost. That would be deferred to.
Good question.
They should not be responsible for the electrical costs. We will follow up on that and verify how they are sub-metered if they are, and how that cost is absorbed by Edison.
Okay.
Or AT&T? That's a great question.
Mayor Pro Tem Allen mentioned something that we have the ability to say yes or no to any given pole that we own, correct? Like Uptown, the decorative poles, if they want to put one there, we can say no. You can put it someplace else that meets your criteria, but it doesn't have to be on our pole.
That's correct, and partly it's because we have demonstrated that they have other options. So where we have the decorative poles, our recommendation this evening is to not allow them on those poles owned by us.
Okay.
But we have to give them alternatives, right?
We have to provide alternatives, or they have to provide their own? If we say no, they want to put it at the corner of California and Yucaipa Boulevard, and we say, no, we can't use our poles. Do
This
they have to
ordinance
find it, or we have to provide it for them?
We don't have to provide the alternative, but they have the right to use other facilities, other poles, other, as Ben mentioned, public facilities that might be available. But we have the ability through this ordinance to exclude the decorative poles in the Uptown area.
Okay, and it'll stand.
So right now, the policy prohibits the decorative poles. It's not a site to consider. As technology or options evolve, maybe there may be a design that's much more compatible or consistent with that, and we can always amend our policy to provide guidance for those poles. But as far as I'm aware, there isn't a replacement pole design that would even integrate to some significant degree or even insignificant degree with those existing decorative poles. And so,
And then Mayor Pro Tem Allen also said that the spacing of these towers, AP poles, have to be 2 football fields, which is essentially 600 feet. How many 600 feet are there between the freeway and Bryant, for example? We're talking hundreds, potentially hundreds of cell sites, if not thousands, a few thousand sites. That's a lot. That's an incredible amount.
Yep, that's a lot of APs.
Anyway, what do you guys want to do?
I think it's important that we have design guidelines for the installation of these particular access, 5G access points. I think it's important that we have this because they're coming. And so we need to have these in place so that we know what to tell them when they arrive.
Is that a
Okay.
motion?
Yes.
Okay, we'll close the public hearing and discussion and
yeah,
motion.
read the ordinance title.
I'm sorry. There's
Ordinance
more?
Ordinance number 388, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Yucaipa regarding small wireless facilities and amending the Yucaipa Development Code regarding the same and adopting environmental findings in connection therewith.
Okay, now I'll close the public hearing, open for council discussion. Denise, you have anything else? Dick, do you have anything else to add?
No.
Greg?
No, but I'll second Denise's motion.
Okay. Since we have a first and a second, Tammy, will you give a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Burdell,
Aye.
Councilmember Bogue,
Aye.
Councilmember Duncan, Mayor Pro Tem Allen,
Aye.
Mayor Avila.
Yes. Okay, it passes. That was the last of our public hearings, and now we're moved to announcements. Anything from the dais to say? Saturday, Denise?
Saturday?
Last Saturday, perhaps?
Oh, yes, I just want to commend staff and the partnership. I did attend or did go visit the site where the drive-through testing was taking place, and very, very impressive. The support by the sheriff was very well appreciated. The way they had everything staged, and it was professional, and applause to all of the city staff that I know the hours that went into putting that together. So, yeah, that was really impressive. So good job.
May I thank one more person publicly? Megan Wolf just did an unbelievable job of putting the logistics together with the health department staff for that whole thing and passing it on to our breakfast club, the second shift of the Yucaipa staff members. But the work she did was just amazing. I called her radar, but I told her check, a MASH story or a MASH TV show this weekend. Make sure you understand that it's a compliment, because she really had taken the ball and run with it like nothing I've seen before. And so I just wanted to share that publicly.
And the other thing too, Ray, when we had the press briefing here, it was about a week and a half back, they did mention that they were doing contact tracing on the employees. Maybe our supervisor is just not been brought up to speed with where they're at with that at this point, but perhaps you could follow through and see if we have to be worried about any of our businesses in the surrounding area, because that's a big number.
I will certainly do that.
Greg? Dick, do you have anything to announce or say?
No, except I'm going stir crazy and being confined to my house. But other than that, I have nothing to say.
Yeah, and I'll say this is the first time in 20 years that I was without my family for Easter. This is a very unusual situation, and it's a little bittersweet. We didn't have to build a big spread, but at the same time, we missed all the noise of family and children and all that stuff that makes Easter special and celebration of the rising of Christ. Anyway, if nothing else be said, Mr. Snow, closed session items.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the City Council, we do have one closed session item this evening. It's conference with real property negotiator regarding assessor's parcel number 0301.
Who have passed away as a result of this pandemic. So I'd like to take a 5-minute break before we go to closed session. We're adjourned from public session. Thank you very much.